This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
The Gambia's President Adama Barrow on course for resounding election win. China's foreign ministry issues a report on democracy in the United States. And Ghanaian climate activists push for sustainable alternative to charcoal and firewood use. Hello and welcome. You're watching Africa Live. We're coming to live from Nairobi. I'm Hannah Viviers. Let's take a look at more stories making headlines. Uganda's President Museveni says Western companies are blind to the country's investment opportunities. And the UN says floods in South Sudan have displaced 1 in 15 people. We begin in the Gambia, where the results tallied so far indicate that incumbent President Adama Barrow is on course for a resounding election win. The partial poll results show that Barrow has so far won 36 of the first 41 constituencies announced. Saturday's poll was the first time Gambians voted in a presidential election since former President Yahya Jammeh fled into exile. Jammeh has been living in Equatorial Guinea after refusing to accept defeat to Barrow in 2016. His 22-year rule was characterized by killings and torture of political opponents. Saturday's election is widely seen as a test of the Gambia's democratic progress and its ability to leave the Jammeh era behind. Well, Chinese private investment in Uganda is growing while Westerners are losing appetite to put money to work in that country. President Yoweri Museveni, in an interview, is pledging to step up efforts to tackle corruption, which has made slow progress. Museveni says Uganda is working to sign a number of deals with Chinese private lenders in sectors from agri and fertilizer processing, minerals processing for textiles. Let's take a look.
I think it is partly the fault of their governments, because their governments don't guide them, don't facilitate them, because I think in China, they put in place some monies in the banks. I think they are called something which help Chinese companies once they get opportunities abroad. I think it is something like that with the Chinese. Now, why the Western governments don't do that, I don't know why. Maybe they didn't care about us. They didn't care about investing in Africa. So, of course, China is heavily populated, and I'm sure with a population which is educated now, they are looking for opportunities. So I think it is a combination of the ideology and the interest of people who want opportunities. But also encourage, so the ideology is the government encourages them, I think encourages their private companies, while the Western governments are lecturing us. You find somebody lecturing Yoweri Museveni. It's really madness. What are you telling me? What I don't know? So there is that disconnection between us and the Western systems.
The UN says the current floods in South Sudan have displaced 1 in 15 people. More than 700,000 people are living in internally displaced persons camps due to flooding. CGTN's Patrick Oyet reports.
In Bentiu town in the north of the country, fresh floods at the weekend cut off the main road linking the airport, town and a base for the United Nations mission in South Sudan. Many are now trapped as flooding has made movement impossible for community members and peacekeepers. This is the 3rd year in a row that most parts of South Sudan are flooding. There are spikes in cases of malaria, snake bites and diarrhea, according to Doctors Without Borders. Women, the elderly and children are the most affected.
Climate crisis can be tackled only at a global level, only with the spirit of solidarity, because the people who are paying the heaviest price do not have much responsibility as a polluter. And for this reason, to go through some of the challenges that they are facing, they need help, they need support, and they need the mechanism of international solidarity.
The floods on the White Nile are due to relentless rains for 3 consecutive years. South Sudan's government says there is also high water on the Blue Nile, which is blocking the flow of water from the White Nile into the Nile River. Crops and some livestock have been washed away. The government says pollution from oil fields is killing the remaining livestock. The United Nations World Food Programme says more than 60% of the population now faces an acute food shortage. The WFP says it now needs more funds to provide food assistance to the needy people. The government is also urging aid workers to provide the much needed humanitarian assistance to those displaced. Patrick Oyet, CGTN, Juba, South Sudan.
Over in the Democratic Republic of Congo, the president has replaced the board chairman of the state-owned mining company and the entire board over allegations of embezzlement of millions of dollars. President Felix Tshisekedi replaced Albert Yuma and his subordinates after a recent report revealed allegations of corruption in the state-owned mining firm. CGTN's Christopher Mringa has more from Kinshasa.
President Felix Tshisekedi announced the replacement of senior officials at the state-owned mining firm Gecamines after allegations emerged that millions of dollars had gone missing. Its former chairman, Albert Yuma, was implicated in a case in which a company where he has shares was accused of embezzling $43 million. But Mr. Yuma has dismissed the accusation as lies fabricated by foreigners seeking to tarnish his reputation. He's a wealthy businessman with close links to former President Joseph Kabila. President Tshisekedi has replaced him with an administrator called Alphonse Caputo Kalubi. The replacement is the president's latest move of reforming the country's mining sector that has had many cases of corruption. Gecamines controls the DRC's production of copper and cobalt, a key component used in making rechargeable batteries for electric vehicles. Chris Sochamringa, CGTN, Kinshasa, Democratic Republic of Congo.
Well, this year, 2021, Tunisia's fragile political situation was further weakened, derailing prospects of an economic recovery. The country's vital tourism industry was hard hit by COVID-19. The North African state has been facing years of political instability since the 2011 uprising, and economists have called for reform to revive the economy. Adnan Shuashi has more.
Tunisian economists say that the country needs more political stability after the president's decision on July 25th to sack the premier, freeze the activities of parliament, and assume executive authority. Experts say the appointment of Najla Bouden as Tunisia's first female prime minister has not contributed to improving the political and economic situation.
For several years now, politicians have claimed that Tunisia succeeded in its democratic transition. Now it's clear with the current economic and political crisis that the country has failed, because there is no democratic and political transition without economic growth, a favorable climate for foreign and domestic investment, and job creation. All economic indicators are at the lowest level, while the country remains unstable and unable to finance the state budget.
Talks with the IMF for a package were halted on July 25th. The managing director of the IMF had stated on October 13th that Tunisia needs urgent and targeted economic reforms to stabilize the economy and put public finances on a sustainable path. However, financial analysts maintain that the North African state is still unable to implement the painful and unpopular economic reforms.
The International Monetary Fund and all international donors have made it clear that Tunisia needs to put in place urgent reforms. Yes, the economic reforms are necessary, but the Tunisian state has not succeeded yet in reforming the public sector wage bill, the subsidy system, and other sectors. There will be no funding without reforms.
Since July 25th, President Kais Saied has refused to hold talks with his political opponents.
The economic and social situation is very alarming. Tunisia is facing a real threat. The president's moves were an opportunity to save and rebuild Tunisia. Unfortunately, Tunisia has missed this opportunity.
Economists explain that in a no-reform scenario, Tunisia may be deemed to require a Paris Club treatment before being eligible for additional IMF funding. This scenario would have implications for private sector creditors. In fact, planned access to international markets would be complicated by the absence of an IMF program. Independent analysts argue that the president's behavior has exacerbated the economic and social crisis. However, Qais Said says the former parliament and governments are responsible for the current situation. He urged the new premier to set a timetable for economic reforms. Adnan Shawishi, CGTN, Tunis.
Ghana and South Africa have signed bilateral agreements to boost trade and investment between the two countries in agriculture, migration, and other sectors of the economy. It follows South African President Cyril Ramaphosa's two-day working visit to the West African country. CGTN's Nabil Ahmed Rafah reports from Accra.
President Ramaphosa's visit to Ghana is part of his tour of 4 West African countries to strengthen intra-African trade and investments. Ghana and South Africa have inaugurated a binational commission to deepen partnership for political and economic development in both countries.
We have discussed exploring possible new areas of economic, trade and investment cooperation, especially in Ghana's key sectors, such as roads, railway infrastructure, mining, energy, manufacturing, as well as agro-processing.
South Africa is one of Ghana's largest foreign direct investors, with businesses in mining, telecommunications and retail. Both countries want to tap into the African Continental Free Trade Area to drive their economies.
We're united by their common determination to free our peoples from foreign domination and racist exploitation. So we are united in our determination to win the battle for rapid economic development by helping to intensify the value-adding industrial transformation of our economies, anchored on the things we make and grow.
However, even as the global economy tries to recover from the disruptions caused by the coronavirus pandemic, the new variant, Omicron, could threaten Africa's economic rebound. While some Western countries have imposed travel restrictions on Southern African countries due to the Omicron COVID-19 variant, President Ramaphosa has urged African countries not to ban travel within the continent. He says it could further derail their economies.
We are driving the health recovery of our continent because we want our continent to be open for business, not to be closed down by travel bans. We are part of driving Africa's recovery and not wanting to hold Africa back.
Ghana and South Africa say armed conflicts and insecurity continue to pose a risk to the continent's development. So, both countries have pledged to work together to tackle terrorism and insurgencies in their regions. Nabil Ahmed Rufai, CGTN, Accra, Ghana.
Well, China's foreign ministry has published a report on democracy in the United States. It highlights the system's deficiencies and accuses Washington of using democracy as a pretext to intervene in other countries' domestic affairs. The report focuses on 3 aspects: deep-seated problems, chaotic practices of democracy, and the consequences of the U.S. exporting its own brand of democracy. It says one of the deep-seated problems is that the U.S.-style democracy has turned into a game of money and politics. The report refers to the death of George Floyd, protests against racism, mishandling of COVID-19, and a widening wealth gap as examples of chaotic democratic practices. It also says the U.S. efforts to export its own brand of democracy has led to wars and triggered regional conflicts and humanitarian catastrophes. Let's now take a short break and return. More in Africa Live, including Ghanaian climate activists push for sustainable alternative to charcoal and firewood use.
So this is it. I'm just about to be shot.
So the tents here, bottles are being thrown. As they do so, we
there are
have
about 3 critical bridges here in MARAWI. That's one of them. We're going to cross that bridge. As you can see behind me, police forces
who are replying with gas. Gas just came in.
Tear gas, so it's all begun now.
Divisions leading the charge into West Mosul have brought us here.
Just got to be careful here with some gunshots.
This is where most of the fighting has been concentrated.
This is the front line now after 9 days of fighting.
We're about 2 to 3 kilometers from the front
clear
line.
View of this front line position.
Welcome back to Africa Live. In spite of a rapid urbanization in Ghana, many people still rely on firewood and charcoal for cooking instead of cleaner energy sources like LPG. Environmentalists are concerned about the effect of this not just on the health of people, but also on the environment. CGTN's Nabil Ahmed Rafah reports from Accra.
Mariama Salifu sells charcoal for a living. It's been her job for more than 20 years.
I'm able to pay my children's school fees by selling charcoal. It helps me in taking good care of my family and their needs.
In Ghana, more than 60% of households use fuel wood, including charcoal, for cooking, according to the government's data. Charcoal and fuel wood produce high levels of pollution, which affects people's health and environment. But many people like Zubaira Munifa, who uses charcoal for her catering business, say they can't switch to cleaner energy like liquefied petroleum gas because it is more expensive.
Using gas can help reduce cutting down trees, but unlike charcoal, gas is extremely dangerous to use for cooking.
While millions of people in sub-Saharan Africa rely on charcoal for cooking, experts say it contributes to climate change because trees are chopped and burnt to make it.
These sacks of charcoal are largely produced in the northern parts of Ghana and transported to Accra and other parts of Ghana. Mariama says she receives about 200 sacks of charcoal every month.
Environmental campaigners want the government to provide subsidy on cleaner energy sources like LPG so people cut down on the use of fuel wood and charcoal. But that could also affect Mariama's source of income.
We have to plant new trees when we cut old ones and use them for charcoal. I think this will help save the environment.
While Kenya has banned the use of charcoal, Ghana is not looking to take that step as yet. Experts say a ban on charcoal and fuel wood could affect many livelihoods.
We need to find a balance as a country because as a developing country, we may not necessarily have the luxury of other energy sources. There are a lot of innovative solutions that have come up over the years. The challenge with fuel wood and greenhouse gas emissions is the ability to combust the wood fully to reduce the emissions. Now, some innovations include the improved cook stove. The improved cook stoves ensure that when we use wood fuel, including charcoal, they are able to burn efficiently and reduce the amount of emissions.
Mariama Salifu agrees. She says a more efficient production and use of charcoal can help sustain her business while also protecting the environment from excessive pollution. Nabil Ahmed Rufai, CGTN, Accra, Ghana.
In Somalia, the annual Mogadishu International Book Fair officially took place in the Somali capital recently. The event brought together authors, artists, composers, literature scholars, poets, and publishers. The exhibition was first held in Mogadishu in 2015, but due to COVID-19, the 2020 edition was cancelled, as Muhammad Kahia now reports from Mogadishu.
The annual event resumed in Mogadishu this year, after last year's gathering was cancelled due to COVID-19 restrictions in the Horn of African nation. The organizers of the academic fair are hopeful that next year's event will be bigger and better.
We would have previously thousands of people that would come during the day. We have about 300 people. We have limited guests and authors that are coming outside of Somalia and from the rest of Somalia. We have limited activities in the program. We have limited books on display here, and we have limited participants. I hope that we can start going back to the previous edition next year, inshallah.
Mohammed Abdullah Artan is one of the few guests invited from the outside the country. He came all the way from Leicester in the UK. He says that despite the challenges they face, Somali authors need to take a leading role in filling the reading gap created during the protracted period of the conflict.
I'm happy after COVID-19 and all the things that is done and ravaged in the communities internationally, that we're still able to produce books, that we're still able to talk about books, that we're still able to bring a quality of reading that is somewhat lacking for the past 3 decades to the Somali public, whether they will be locally or abroad.
This year's edition of the Mogadishu Book Fair was limited to few people in order to curb the spread of COVID-19 and its variants. Few students from selected schools in Mogadishu took part in this year's event. They enjoyed storytelling and painting among other activities at the fair as they refreshed their minds before heading back for lessons at their learning institutions. Mohamed Kahir, CGTN, Mogadishu, Somalia.
Well, here's what's coming up in sport. Sports fans to use vaccine passports as stadia across Tunisia open up for spectators. Let's take a look at what's happening in the world of sport.